It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. My husband and I had rented a vacation home for the week, a nice place tucked into the woods near a popular hiking area. After a stressful few months, the idea of some quiet, fresh air and time away from the city sounded perfect. The house was nice enough, though it had that slightly outdated second home vibe. Still, it was comfortable and quiet. One of the selling points of the property was its modern security system. There was a keypad for entry, motion detecting floodlights, and even a doorbell camera connected to an app on our phones. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon, unpacked and settled in. The first couple days were uneventful. Morning hikes, quiet evenings watching TV or reading, but on the third night, something happened that I'll never forget. It started around 10 p.m. We'd just gone to bed when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the doorbell camera. Motion detected at the front door. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, expecting to see a deer or some other wildlife wandering by. Instead, the screen showed a person standing just outside the porch light, mostly in shadow. I froze. The figure didn't move for a moment, and then they stepped closer. It was a man, older, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking directly at the camera. "Who is it?" my husband asked. I showed him the screen, and his expression changed immediately. My husband got up and began walking to the door. The man stood there for another few seconds before turning and walking out of frame. After we double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows, my husband and I stayed up for another hour checking the app every few minutes, but nothing else happened. Eventually, we managed to fall asleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. We told ourselves it was probably just a hiker who'd gotten lost, or possibly someone who was drunk wandering around. It wasn't uncommon for tourists to wander onto properties around here, and we tried to brush it off. That night, we made sure every door and window was locked, but around midnight, once again, the app buzzed. Motion detected at the front door. This time, the man wasn't standing on the porch. He was crouched, his face inches from the camera, staring directly into the lens. I woke my husband up and shoved the phone toward him. The man stayed like that for a moment, then reached up and put something over the camera, something dark that blocked the view completely. We heard a faint noise outside, like footsteps on gravel. My husband got up and insisted on checking the house. I begged him to stay inside, but he wouldn't listen. I stayed by the window, phone in hand, ready to call 911. He didn't find anything. No one was there. The rest of the night was awful. Every little sound had me on edge. The wind, the trees, even the house creaking, it all felt wrong. The next morning, we decided to cut the trip short. As we were packing up, I checked the camera footage again. The feed was empty, but as I scrolled back, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Around 3 a.m., after we'd gone back to bed, the man reappeared. He was inside the house. The camera in the living room caught him moving through the kitchen, stopping to look at the pictures on the fridge and the papers on the counter. I couldn't breathe. The footage ended with him walking down the hallway toward the bedrooms. And that was it. We didn't see him leave. We didn't see him open any doors. However he had entered, he also left undetected. We called the local police on the way out of town, but nothing ever came of it. That trip was supposed to be an escape, but now I don't think I'll ever feel safe in a vacation rental again. It was late August, and my buddy and I decided to rent this cabin on a lake for the weekend. The place came with access to an old motorboat, so we figured we'd use it to relax and maybe do some fishing. The cabin was simple, nothing fancy, but it was nice being out there, quiet and peaceful. On the second night, after dinner, we decided to take the boat out. It was a clear night with just a sliver of moonlight reflecting off the water. We stayed pretty close to the shore, just floating there, drinking some beers and listening to music on a little Bluetooth speaker. It was the perfect way to unwind. Sometime around 11, I heard this weird splashing sound coming from behind us. At first, I thought it might be a fish or something, maybe some other wildlife, but it didn't stop. It was steady, rhythmic, and getting closer. Jake turned off the music, and that's when I heard it more clearly. Someone swimming. I stood up and tried to spot them, but the water was so dark it was hard to make anything out. Then I saw this head bobbing up and down in the lake, heading straight for us. When he got closer, I could see it was a guy, no shirt, just a pair of shorts. He was gasping for air and calling out, saying his boat had sunk. It was one of those situations where you don't have time to think, you just react. We reached down and helped pull him into the boat. He collapsed on the floor, soaking wet and breathing hard. He didn't say much at first, he just laid there catching his breath. We were kind of stunned and not sure what to do. After a minute or so, he sat up and looked around. That's when things started to feel off. The guy was jittery, fidgety, like he couldn't sit still. His eyes kept darting around the boat, at the cooler, at our bags, at anything he could see. He said something about hitting a rock and his boat taking on water, but his story didn't make any sense. He didn't seem panicked or upset about losing a boat, just kind of weird. We told him we'd take him back to shore, but the whole time he kept shifting around like he couldn't get comfortable. I started to feel uneasy, like something wasn't right. We were maybe halfway back to the dock when the guy stood up, pacing a little in the boat. Then out of nowhere, he said something like, "You're lucky to have a boat like this." There was something about the way he said it, the tone that just didn't sit right. Before I could react, he lunged at my friend. It happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. The guy tackled him, grabbing at him and trying to push him down. My friend fought back, managing to shove the guy off him, but the guy wasn't giving up. He grabbed for him again, clawing at him, and it turned into a full-on fight. I grabbed the closest thing I could, a flashlight, and swung it at the guy's back. It wasn't hard enough to knock him out or anything, but it gave my friend enough time to get the upper hand. He shoved the guy hard, and the guy lost his balance and fell over the side of the boat, splashing into the water. We just stood there, frozen, watching as he treaded water a few feet away. He didn't yell or curse at us, he just stared. Then without a word, he started swimming toward the shore. We didn't stick around to see where he went. We fired up the motor and got back to the dock as fast as we could. Once we were inside the cabin, we locked every door and window and stayed up the rest of the night watching the lake from the front window. The next morning, we called the rental office to report what had happened, but they didn't seem too concerned. They said they'd let the police know, and that was about it. The scariest part was that there was no mention of a sunken boat anywhere on the lake. No reports of a missing person or anything. It's like the guy had just disappeared. I don't know what his deal was or what he wanted, but I'm glad we got away when we did. When I landed my current job, I decided to take a solo backpacking trip through Europe before I officially started. It was something I'd always wanted to do, and I knew I'd be heavily focused on the new position once it started. I was on a tight budget, so I booked cheap hostels in every city. Most of them were fine, basic but clean, with other travelers around to talk to. But when I got to Budapest, I ended up at a place that still gives me chills when I think about it. It was late when I arrived. The hostel was in an older part of the city, tucked away on a quiet street. The building itself was beautiful in a dilapidated way. Tall windows, crumbling stonework, and an iron gate that creaked when I pushed it open. Inside was a different story. The lobby was small and dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew. The receptionist was an older man who barely spoke English. He checked me in quickly and handed me a key, pointing me toward the staircase at the back of the lobby. The hallway on the second floor was long and dark, with just a single bare bulb every few feet. My room was at the far end. When I opened the door, I saw it was a dorm-style setup, 6 beds in a small space. 5 were empty, and the 6th had a single backpack propped up against it. Its owner wasn't there. I picked a bed by the window and unpacked a little. There wasn't much to do except sleep, so I laid down, scrolled through my phone a bit, and then dozed off. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of someone moving around. When I opened my eyes, I saw a man sitting on the bed with the backpack. He was facing away from me, hunched over like he was looking for something. I said hello, and he froze. Then he turned around to look at me. Some of these people you stay with can be pretty awkward, but this particular encounter was super strange. He just stared at me in a way that made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. He apologized and said that he didn't mean to wake me. I nodded and rolled back over, trying to shake away the weird feeling he gave me, but I could hear him moving around for a while longer before it finally went quiet. The next morning, he was gone. His bed was made and his backpack was still sitting in the same spot. I spent the day exploring the city and didn't come back to the hostel until late that night. When I got to the room, the guy was back. This time he was sitting on his bed, staring out the window. I tried to be friendly and just said, "Hey." He didn't respond. I set my stuff down and climbed into the bed, feeling uneasy in the silence. I couldn't explain why. He hadn't done anything threatening, but there was something about him that just made me uncomfortable. I laid there in the dark trying to fall asleep for a long time, and eventually I guess I did, because a few hours later I woke up to a soft rustling sound. I opened my eyes just enough to see him standing by the door, holding something in his hands. It was hard to tell in the darkness, but it looked like my backpack. I sat up and asked him what he was doing. He jumped, dropping the bag on the floor, and apologized, saying he thought it was his. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him until he backed away and climbed into his bed. The next morning, I went down to the lobby to tell the receptionist about what happened. I wanted to see if I could switch rooms. When I described the guy, the receptionist just stared at me, confused. In broken English, he told me that there was no one else in the room. I didn't want to be too confrontational, so I told him that there had been someone there when I had arrived. I think there was a bit of a language barrier or something, because the receptionist just shook his head at me and told me that I was the only person booked for that room. I didn't know what to say. I went back to the room, and sure enough, his bed was empty and the backpack was gone. I'm not trying to imply that this was some paranormal incident. It actually happened, but I don't know if the guy had snuck in at some point to avoid paying, or if the receptionist knew him and they had an arrangement where the guy would steal from the guests. I left that day. I didn't care about the rest of my booking. Whatever was going on in that hostel, I didn't want to stick around and find out.